They ruled empires, wore crowns of gold, commanded armies that could crush nations. But when the royal doors closed, behind the velvet curtains of power, these kings became something else. Lust-driven, bloodthirsty, obsessed. Some had hundreds of mistresses and turned palaces into dens of sin. Others married 6 wives and sent 2 to the chopping block. Some kings believed they were made of glass, hiding in their rooms, terrified of shattering. And then there were those who ate themselves to death, drowning in wine and roasted meat while their people starved. Tonight, we tear open the pages of history that school never dared to show you, the dirty, twisted, shocking secrets of British royalty. From kings who loved blood more than love, to kings who couldn't control their darkest desires, this is not the monarchy you think you know. So buckle up, because by the end of this story, you'll never look at history the same way again. They ruled empires, wore crowns of gold, commanded armies that could crush nations. But when the royal doors closed, behind the velvet curtains of power, these kings became something else, lust-driven, bloodthirsty, obsessed. Some had hundreds of mistresses and turned palaces into dens of sin. Others married 6 wives and sent 2 to the chopping block. Some kings believed they were made of glass, hiding in their rooms, terrified of shattering. And then there were those who ate themselves to death, drowning in wine and roasted meat, while their people starved. Tonight, we tear open the pages of history that school never dared to show you, the dirty, twisted, shocking secrets of British royalty. From kings who loved blood more than love, to kings who couldn't control their darkest desires. This is not the monarchy you think you know. So buckle up, because by the end of this story, you'll never look at history the same way again. Barbara Villiers was not just any mistress. She was the mistress. Born into a noble but struggling family, Barbara was breathtakingly beautiful, with dark hair, bold eyes, and a confidence that could command any room. She was ambitious, ruthless, and had only one goal: power. When Charles first laid eyes on her, he was smitten. But Barbara was no innocent damsel waiting to be rescued. She knew what she wanted and how to get it. Soon, she wasn't just sharing the king's bed. She was shaping his decisions. Ministers feared her, courtiers envied her, and even the queen could not ignore her influence. Barbara gave birth to several of Charles's illegitimate children, and he rewarded her with titles, wealth, and influence beyond imagination. But Barbara's appetite for power was as insatiable as the king's appetite for pleasure. She meddled in politics, sold royal favors, and used her position to amass an empire of her own. Yet she was not the only one. While Barbara ruled the court like a queen, new stars were rising on the horizon, actresses who captured not just the stage, but the king's heart, and one of them would soon challenge Barbara's throne. If Barbara Villiers was power and ambition, Nell Gwyn was pure charm and laughter. Born into poverty, Nell sold oranges in London's theaters as a young girl. But fate had bigger plans. She became an actress, and her wit and beauty made her a sensation on the stage. Charles noticed her during a performance, and from that moment, Nell's life changed forever. Unlike Barbara's fierce elegance, Nell was warm, funny, and utterly irresistible. She didn't play the courtly games of intrigue. She won the king with honesty and humor. People loved Nell because she never forgot where she came from. While other mistresses flaunted jewels and gowns, Nell joked about her humble beginnings and charmed even those who hated the king's excesses. She gave birth to 2 of Charles's sons and remained one of his favorites until his death. But even with Nell's charm, the king's appetite didn't stop there. Charles's court was overflowing with mistresses, each one bringing drama, rivalry, and scandal. And it wasn't just about pleasure. Sometimes these relationships nearly plunged England into political chaos. Next, we dive into the dark side of desire, the dangerous affairs that threatened the crown itself. Charles's bedroom wasn't just a playground, it was a battlefield. Some of his affairs weren't about love or desire. They were about power. Take Louise de Querouaille, for example, a stunning French beauty sent by the King of France himself. Her mission? Seduce Charles and make sure England danced to France's tune. And she succeeded. Charles was completely infatuated with her, showering her with titles, wealth, and influence. But this affair sparked outrage. People accused Charles of selling out England for a woman's touch, and whispers of treason spread through the court. Then there was Hortense Mancini, the fiery Italian duchess who fled her abusive husband to find refuge in England. She became Charles's mistress, but not for long. Hortense had a taste for danger, and soon she began an affair with Anne Leonard, one of Charles's own mistresses. This scandal rocked the court and gave Charles a bitter taste of betrayal. These weren't just romantic dalliances, they were political grenades. Every kiss, every secret meeting could shift alliances, topple ministers, and endanger the crown. Charles played this dangerous game with a smile, but the risks were deadly real. And if you think this was wild, wait until you hear about the extravagant gifts Charles gave to his mistresses, jewels, palaces, and fortunes beyond belief. In the next section, we'll uncover the price of pleasure and how much the crown paid for the king's passions. Charles II was called the Merry Monarch for a reason. He didn't hold back when it came to rewarding the women he loved. But these weren't simple flowers and poems. No, Charles gave gifts fit for queens because that's exactly how he treated his mistresses. Barbara Villiers, for example, didn't just get jewels, she received entire estates, priceless paintings, and a fortune in gold. Charles even created her husband, the Earl of Castlemaine, just to keep appearances. Nell Gwyn, she was given a beautiful house in Pall Mall and an annual allowance that most nobles could only dream of. Louise de Querouaille, Charles made her the Duchess of Portsmouth and showered her with gifts straight from the royal treasury. But these extravagant rewards came at a cost, a national cost. England was already struggling financially after years of war and plague, and here was the king emptying the treasury for his lovers. The people were furious. Pamphlets mocked the king, calling him a slave to lust. Parliament pushed back, demanding to know why public money was funding private pleasure. Yet Charles didn't stop. To him, life was short, and he believed in living it lavishly. His court became the most decadent in Europe, filled with banquets, music, laughter, and scandal. But what about the queen? Catherine of Braganza, the woman who married Charles for alliance and love, had to watch this circus unfold. What was her life like, knowing her husband belonged to countless others? In the next section, we step into the silent world of the queen who endured it all. While Charles danced through life surrounded by mistresses, one woman stood in the shadows, his queen, Catherine of Braganza. She came from Portugal, bringing a rich dowry, tea, and even Bombay as part of the royal marriage deal. When she first met Charles, she dreamed of a life of love and loyalty, but reality was cruel. From the moment she arrived in England, Catherine faced humiliation. Within weeks of their wedding, she learned the truth. Her husband already had mistresses, and he had no intention of giving them up. Imagine the heartbreak. Every royal banquet, every public event, Catherine had to watch other women sit closer to the king than she could. But it wasn't just emotional pain. Catherine desperately wanted to give Charles an heir, a son to secure the Stuart dynasty. She tried again and again, but suffered multiple miscarriages. Every failure crushed her spirit, while the king fathered over a dozen illegitimate children with his lovers. The irony was brutal. The mistresses could give him what the queen could not. And yet, Catherine stayed. Why? Because she loved Charles, and perhaps, deep down, hoped he might love her back one day. In private, Charles was kind to her, gentle even, but never faithful. For Catherine, it was a life of lavish prisons and silent tears. But even Catherine's sorrow couldn't dim the king's appetite for pleasure. His reign became a golden age of scandal, with wild parties, drunken nights, and a court where virtue was the only thing in short supply. Next, we'll peel back the velvet curtains and step inside the wildest royal parties England had ever seen. If you think today's celebrities throw wild parties, wait until you hear about Charles II's court. His palace wasn't just a royal residence, it was the epicenter of decadence. Nights at Whitehall were legendary, filled with music, wine, and sin. Picture this: candlelight flickering. On gilded walls, the air thick with the smell of roast meats, perfumes, and burning wax. Musicians played violins and lutes while courtiers laughed, danced, and gambled fortunes away at cards and dice. But the real entertainment happened behind closed doors. Charles loved masquerades, lavish balls where nobles wore masks, and identity melted away with morality. Men and women swapped partners freely, and what started as a dance often ended in secret chambers. The king himself would slip away from the crowd, arm in arm with one of his many lovers, while courtiers pretended not to notice. There were feasts so grand that entire tables groaned under the weight of roasted swans, gilded pies, and rivers of wine. Champagne flowed like water, and with every drink, inhibitions vanished. Affairs began, rivalries exploded, and reputations were destroyed, all in one night. This was the age of hedonism, and Charles reveled in it. He wasn't just the King of England, he was the king of pleasure, and his court was the stage for a play where scandal was the script. But the question remains, could a man live like this without consequences? In the next section, we'll uncover the diseases, betrayals, and downfall that came with this life of lust. For years, Charles II lived like a god among men, wine, women, and power at his fingertips. But even kings can't escape the price of excess. Behind the laughter and luxury lurked dark consequences that would slowly catch up with him. First came the scandals. The English people, already weary of royal spending, were furious that their king lavished money on mistresses while the nation suffered poverty. Pamphlets called him the royal adulterer, and preachers thundered from pulpits about his sins. Parliament threatened to cut funds unless the king curbed his passions. But Charles? He ignored them all. Pleasure was his throne. Then came the disease. The court was a breeding ground for illness, and venereal diseases spread like wildfire. Rumors whispered that Charles himself suffered from syphilis, though the truth remains uncertain. What we do know is that by his 40s, his health was deteriorating, frequent fevers, weakness, and a body worn down by years of indulgence. And betrayal? Oh, it was everywhere. Mistresses who once loved him plotted for power, securing titles and wealth for their illegitimate children. Courtiers whispered in shadows, waiting for the king's strength to fail so they could rise. Even his closest companions eyed the throne, knowing a monarch like Charles wouldn't last forever. By the winter of 1685, the Merry Monarch was no longer merry. His once vibrant court had become a den of intrigue, fear, and decay. And when death finally came for Charles, it came fast, brutal, and filled with irony. On the cold morning of February 1st, 1685, the laughter of Whitehall fell silent. Charles II, the king who once filled England with music, parties, and pleasure, was struck down by a sudden and violent illness. Within hours, the Merry Monarch was fighting for his life. Doctors rushed to his side, but remember, this was the 17th century. Their treatments were nothing short of torture. They bled him of nearly a pint of blood, forced him to vomit with vile potions, and even applied heated cups and pigeon feathers to his skin, believing it would draw out the sickness. Instead of saving him, they made his agony worse. For 4 days, the once powerful king lay pale and broken, whispering prayers and apologies. Those who visited him saw a man transformed, no longer the vibrant monarch of banquets and mistresses, but a soul staring into eternity. And then something remarkable happened. On his deathbed, Charles revealed a secret. He converted to Catholicism. After a life of scandal and sin, he turned to the faith he had once concealed, shocking everyone around him. Finally, on February 6, 1685, Charles II breathed his last. His final words, "Let not poor Nellie starve." Even in death, he thought of Nell Gwynn, the mistress who loved him without ambition. It was a moment of unexpected tenderness from a man who lived in excess. The king who had more mistresses than any monarch in British history, who ruled through pleasure and passion, left behind a kingdom in debt, a court in chaos, and a legend that would never die. Charles II was gone, but the scandal, the intrigue, and the wild stories of his reign live on, even today.